hi everyone. I'm Nandini, and I worked with CEP as a lecturer. I think I was one of the first lecturers to be recruited in England. I was the first time there were non-American sort of recruitment efforts. And I was an outlier in many ways. I was neither East or West European. I had never been to the US before. I had no idea about much, but I was in between my doctoral work and I signed on to go to Lithuania. I worked in Lithuania for 2 years and then had the privilege of being recruited as the regional director for then a very fast expanding Baltics and Eurasian programs. And so it has been a transformative experience for me at both personal and professional level. I'm not going to say much about my own experience at this point. We have short time, and the idea of this session is to move a little bit away from personal experiences and memories and testimonials and focus on a big idea. And the idea is CEP used the slogan, education for democracy. And if early days, if you remember, our tote bags, our T-shirts, conference T-shirts, we used to have CEP, the countries we were, and education for democracy. And the question is, Donna has the T-shirt. How wonderful, Donna. That's great. I have the tote bag. And here it is. So this is a little bit of an ideas conversation. And both education and democracy are vast concepts and multifaceted concepts. And this is my perspective, that although not articulated as such, the twin Humboldtian principles of freedom to teach and freedom to learn informed CEP endeavor. And I think Anne had mentioned that we didn't use a template. It was all a bottom-up effort. And similarly, there was no template for teaching in the early days. Each individual was empowered to shape their course based on what they knew and use pedagogical principles they were familiar with it. And in turn, they empowered their own students. So it was very much focused on freedom to learn and freedom to teach. And that fostered dynamic classrooms and wonderful conversations. And many of you have spoken about what ensued. And these networks and ideas continue. The question for us here is, I think there is a tangible impact at individual level. The question for us is, our collective and individual efforts, which were towards the process of democratization of societies in general, but institutions of higher education in particular, how impactful we were. Do we think that we made a tangible contribution? And I think each individual will think about this question differently. So it's a free-flowing conversation. And I'd say if we could creep our remarks to 5 to 6 minute stops, it'll allow for follow-up sort of questions and conversations. So I'll invite Sasha Shtokvych to begin this conversation. Sasha, we know Sasha since he was a little kid. And we've seen him grow into a fantastic professional. And Sasha has worn many hats. And now he's affiliated with OSUN. Sasha, over to you. You continue to do continue to take on CEP's legacy to different places. So over to you now.
Thank you very much, Nandini. I will probably disappoint you with my remarks because I think you're calling us to be more analytical.
Yeah.
But I cannot think and speak about CEP without this profoundly personal relationship. Not only I worked formally for CEP for 5 years, but all of my professional history of the last 32 years is connected to CEP, and I have sort of come full circles many times, and CEP was present in every one of them. So I want to start with a small personal reflection. When Jonathan and I want to thank Jonathan and also Vlad Rashkovan for kind of making the push to actually have this reunion happen. It was delayed many times because of COVID, because of the crisis, because of the war. I was a little anxious going into this Zoom meeting, but I find it extremely therapeutic. It's just so wonderful to see all of you, and it's so humbling for me to feel that I belong to this much bigger world of a lot of amazing people, many of whom I have never met or whose names I only heard and read in the annual reports. But it has been a personally transformative, not transformative. I mean, it's my birth, and it's my growing up, and it's my sort of self-definition that what I owe to CEP. I know that CEP also has sort of several generations, and different generations speak their own language. They have their own memories. They have their own definitions of what CEP is. And I'm really grateful and happy that I was part of one of the first major sort of transformations of CEP at the time when it added this initially what was called the Eastern Scholars Program, then became the local faculty fellows. I was also part, somewhat reluctant part of the second big transformation when CEP was taken over by HESP. And I was at that time actually working at HESP for the Open Society Foundations. But on that, I want to say that CEP did also shape HESP in many ways, not only because a lot of colleagues who worked at CEP would then became associated with HESP, but CEP was a precursor of HESP, and it did not only give HESP the reason for being, the reason for its sort of initial purpose, but it became the major network, the major source of ideas, the major source of brilliant colleagues who were then driving HESP programs and building up various HESP programs. So that should not be overestimated. And even in my own career of 15 years with HESP, I continuously engaged with colleagues who I knew from CEP, and most inspiringly, the colleagues from the countries where CEP worked, not so much. I mean, of course, there were a lot of visiting fellows, but there were a lot of local fellows who have become this sort of agents of change that we wanted to invest in, that we wanted to empower, that has had an ambition to kind of put in positions of influence in the local context to achieve this, proverbial systems transformation. I was the way I came to CEP, and I think what I remain now, working with the Open Society University Network, but also being at CEU, I have not moved very far away from being a grassroots person towards being a systems person. I believe the impact on systems, the kind of the view of the system is extremely important to have. But I think it's more important to understand that systems, especially higher education system, is extremely vulnerable to any political change. And we see this in the region. And I think the best kind of approach or the best antidote is to still not to divorce the focus on the grassroots, the focus on individuals, the focus on networks that straddle national borders, that straddle education and activism, to think more about the changing and sustaining a different culture. And I think that is what CEP really, really succeeded in. I think Ukraine is, well, it's the closest example to me, and it's hard I mean, it's hard to talk about this without a lump in your throat. But I think Ukraine is also an amazing example of CEP's investment in individuals. There may be a few places here and there in Ukraine, as well as in other countries on the map of CEP, where some systemic, some institutional impact has been achieved. And the places where it was achieved and is sustained is where colleagues who worked within CEP, but also colleagues who, through CEP, got access to the networks and the new ideas and various other programs that supported them, have come to the positions of power, have come to the positions of authority. But again, the strength of the network that we have in Ukraine, the strength of the different culture within higher education, different culture within intellectual circles, is really the investment in the individuals. And again, there will be colleagues at this panel who will speak about Russia, about Belarus. If we want to become analytical about this, I think we really need to think about different political systems and the impact they have on higher education, rather than the agenda of the donors who insist that the focus should be on the systems change. I'll finish at this, and thank you again for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Sasha, for getting us started on this, and for our speakers who'll come after this. Higher education has become a battleground of ideologies, even in Western liberal democracies. So it's not particular to the former East. So I think this conversation is sort of, it could be pitched at any level. So with that, I'll invite George Gereby to say, to talk about, tell us about what's going on in Hungary and in general from your perspective, because I think education and democracy is central to this conversation from Hungarian perspective too.
Well, thank you, Nandini, and greetings to everybody here, and special thanks to John for organizing this meeting, which recalls the heroic pioneer years of the early 90s, when around the time of the system changes, people were, including myself, very optimistic, I served as the startup country director for 2 years, and then moved over to the higher education support program, which was again the startup director, and then I sort of reserved a small place in Hungarian higher education reform, serving with as the advisor to the liberal Minister of Higher Education, and then participated in the beginnings of the World Bank program for reform and for the preparation of the new higher education law. So that was a challenging and extremely interesting period, but it all came to a sour end, because the World Bank higher education loan was cancelled by the first Orbán government, and then as you all know, CEU was forced out of the country in 2019, and the universities are now in a precarious situation, because most of them have been turned into basically government institutions, because they were so-called privatized, in the sense of given over to government-controlled board of trustees, and the few which remained state-funded universities, they are just starved to death, really. At my alma mater, the average salary of an associate professor is still at the level of about how much that would be, about $7,000 a year. Not much, is it? So the situation is rather bleak now, which teaches us the lesson that we can't really take the development and improvement for granted. You really have to invest continuously into maintaining the standards, the environment, the initiative to promote democracy. Since 2007, I'm teaching now at CEU, and therefore I have only sort of indirect contact to what's going on in the universities, except some of them where I've got friends and I got up to date information. So it's a I'm sorry for not being able to contribute with more cheerful news, but just talk to friends who are leaving the higher education scene because of the bleak future they see for themselves. So it's a very complicated issue, and I just mentioned the curious anecdote, which probably gives a little insight into how complex and paradoxical the reception of CEP was back in the early 90s, when one of the sort of leading figures of the former democratic opposition, who was then head of the philosophy department at ELTE, the major science university. When I approached him with the offer of receiving a CEP, then the answer was, no, we don't need that, because they want to teach us how to eat with knife and forks. So that that wasn't easy to overcome the initial resistance, even from the more open-minded part of the university society as well. But anyway, CEP did make a very important contribution in the early years, and I was really honored and proud to have learned the friendship of so many wonderful people who came over under the CEP aegis. But yes, I mean, I'd like to return to the punchline that that you can't take improvement for granted. Zoltán Kovács, who became one of the speakers for the Orbán government, was initially a CEP fellow, and he became such a doubtful character. So the problem is that you have to sort of fight your way and fight your principles basically every day. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, George. And I think you have underscored by one aspect which is important for this conversation is the institutional autonomy, the aspect of institutional autonomy in the democratization of university, or in the case of Hungary, where there has been a clampdown. So with that, I will now turn to Bermet Tursonkulova, who was a AFP CEP Eastern Scholar and a Loken Fellow at the American University of Central Asia, and the Regional Director of Central Asia. So over to you for 5 to 6 minutes, Bermet.
Thank you very much. I indeed wore several hats. I first was a local fellow, Eastern Scholar with CEP, and I even received the Stephen Grant Award. I never thought at that moment that I would actually get to meet the person, even virtually. I received that award before I actually went to have my first son for my maternity leave. The maternity leave, according to the Kyrgyz law, that compensation, the legal compensation is really miserable. So the Stephen Grant Award was just in time for us to buy the stroller. So thank you very much. Then I get to become the Deputy Director for Central Asia and Mongolia for CEP. And as Sasha mentioned, I was also among those who was reluctant to move from CEP to AFP. Yet I became the regional manager for AFP Central Asia and Mongolia. Then I had my second son, and then I came back to become the AFP local fellow. So I really had many circles and different hats. In terms of what CEP or AFP has been successful, I think CEP has, at least that's my feeling and how I felt it, had more focus on students, on how to teach students the critical thinking, the democracy, and we taught them to be the agents of change. We had debates, regional debate forums, regional conferences, international conferences, and probably we succeeded. There was a critical mass of students who became the agents of change. When the organization became the AFP, I think the focus has switched more for fellows and for their academic and professional development, and teaching them how to become, real academics, how to do research, how to publish in international journals. So when the AFP took over, we really didn't have foreign professors to come and teach at local universities, but rather the international fellows who came to work with local fellows and help them publish, help them to make research, and etc. So in our case at AUCA, we had one of the international fellows was Sally Cummings, who came from St. Andrews University, and we, a group of professors in the politics department, we published with Sally, and we were published in a special edition of Central Asian Survey, several articles devoted to the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. I think some of the colleagues has already mentioned how naive we were at those times. In 2005, we were also naive. After the Rose Revolution happened, the Orange Revolution happened, the Tulip Revolution happened. We thought, yes, we reached it, we have the democracy. Unfortunately, it didn't happen so. Many students whom we thought are agents of change, were they actually the agents of change? And, they've helped to promote democracy. However, we see some of the students who were educated by CEP and AFP professors who have been educated in Western universities right now, have the power positions in Georgia and Kyrgyzstan and Russia, yet we see the promotion of the liberal laws right now. And when we thought that we actually moved to democracy and the transition has ended, we actually see the slide back again towards authoritarian rules. We see what's happening in Georgia, in Kyrgyzstan, in Russia, of course. So as I think George has said, it's not that, you think you've reached the democracy. There is a point when you say, that's it, that's the finish line. It's a constant work in progress. And I don't think that we can blame CEP or anyone else or whoever, that we didn't complete the mission. It actually has to be instilled in current students, whoever, stayed in the teaching position, that you actually have to fight. It's never given to you as granted, that this fight is never going to end unless you actually compete for the rest of your life. Though I wanted to finish on a more positive note, saying that maybe they want to, you cannot say there was a tangible thing that, that CEP has reached in this, but certain things, at least in the Kyrgyz system of education, the CEP had a lot of influence on this, things like reforms in the curriculum development that were, certain laws that were passed by the Kyrgyz Ministry of Education that kind of provided for academic freedom, laws that provided for the recognition of degrees received by the Western education universities or abroad. That has been a fight by several fellows, by several faculty, by several universities that actually had been in place. Again, I don't think we can say that's it, that's the end. You always have to be on watch, saying that should not be moved. You always have to fight for the academic freedom. We in Kyrgyzstan personally right now in a very vulnerable position, because we really do not know what's going to happen afterwards, after certain laws have been already adopted in Kyrgyzstan. And we think that the fight is going to be, is going to be a long fight again. And with this, I will end. Thank you very much for organizing this reunion. Sorry, for not being a very positive speaker at this point, but this is the mood in the country right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bermet, and not at all. Please do not be sorry. This is supposed to be an honest conversation. And I think investment in education is for the long term. And you talked about vigilance. And I think, yes, all of us have to be vigilant about how things can quickly erode. The small freedoms we gain can be quickly eroded. And it is happening across the globe. And I think, therefore, it is a pertinent conversation to be had at this juncture. So with that, I'm mixing up the order a little bit to throw John off. So in fact, the next speaker will be Jonathan Becker. Over to you, John.
Wow. All right. So I'm fully unprepared, but I will begin this by saying the following. Let me bookend two conversations with George Soros. One was at a HES board meeting in 1994 at the Taverna Hotel in Budapest, where I wasn't even invited, but I sort of invited myself to wait as the CEP budget was being reviewed. And the conclusion was CEP was going to be eliminated. I was brought into a room, sat down next to George Soros. Sitting around the table was the whole OSF board, who told me how expensive CEP was. I was European director at the time, having been a volunteer lecturer in Ukraine in 92, 93, then an accidental country director. And I got in an argument with the entire board in which they were saying it's so expensive, each lecture costs X amount. And I basically stammered for a minute and then got in a vigorous argument, having been a high school debater, and basically told them they were full of shit and that their metric was wrong. The metric should be how many students we were reaching, not how much each professor costs. And if you use that metric, it's a totally radically different thing. So George moved our budget we asked for 2.7 million. It had been reduced to 0. He reinstituted 2.4 million and said we will get the next 300,000 if we create this Eastern Scholars Program I had talked about, which ultimately actually got support from Ford. So that's conversation number one then. And it was a tremendous. I also then got hired by CU, and he gave me his phone number, which is very nice. My next conversation was about the other conversation was about a year ago when we were talking about New College in Florida. And the conversation was how the values of Orban and Hungary were now leaking to the United States. How one of the trustees, Chris Rufo of New College, Florida, which eviscerated a public liberal arts institution to try to mold it in the way that George was talking about. So these are the twin poles of things in some ways, which inform. And then, so let me bring you to the present, because the other day I was on the lawn at Bard, and I bumped into our students for Justice in Palestine, who were talking about a program Bard runs with Al-Quds University. So we're the only U.S. institution with a dual degree partnership with Al-Quds University. It's based on a model we had with Smolny College in Russia, which I'll talk about in a second. And they said two things. One of them is that liberal education abroad is an imperial endeavor. And can we deepen relationship with Bard's partnership with Al-Quds University? So I was trying to reconcile these two things, which is sort of awkward. And that made me think about CEP. So in some ways, CEP was an imperial endeavor, all right? I think sometimes when what George was talking about, people saying, why do we want these things? There were cases when we had people who were ABDs or MAs telling distinguished professors how to do things. And there were challenges associated with it. I think we should acknowledge that that was one of the threads. But I don't think really ultimately that's what defined things. I think what defined things more, and we've heard about this before, is the work with students and fellow faculty members, right? And the seeds that things planted. The work with students and with things which actually work pretty well in authoritarian societies, debate programs, student conferences, model UNs, opportunity to create reading, that those things were important and are important. So when we hear Brian Whitmore talking about Odessa State University and the students, that is a really, really important legacy of things. I think the legacy is doing what you can in the environment. We can't change the environment, but what are the maximum number of things you can do to change learning in a system which may be welcoming at one time and maybe less welcoming, and how you can adapt to different systems. And my professional life, which entails working in Russia, working in Kyrgyzstan, adapting some of these methods to places like Palestine, are relevant in that regard. Let me just say a couple of other things. One of them is the education of students, the emphasis on teaching methods, and that is so important, and creating some seemingly minor systemic changes like Bermet spoke about, which allow for better flexible curriculums, better student learning. Those are legacies which go on and which are really important. Being nostalgic, I could say, Bard ran a program with St. Petersburg State University called Smolny College. It was a liberal arts program, which was closed after 25 years, just before the latest escalation in Ukraine. And we were declared an enemy of Russia's constitutional order. And liberal arts was attacked as this horrible Western concept. And it was interesting, when that was winding down, I was teaching an online class sort of like this, and I had students from there in it. And they asked me, well, what do you think about this? And what's the impact? And I said, look, I would do it again. It doesn't matter. We've even though we were closed, we still educated. We have 2,000 plus graduates. We have people who have gone on and whose lives have been shaped because of this in different ways. So even if what we're doing is stopped at one point, just as CEP to AFP to other things, our legacy of teaching, our legacy of impacting people carries on. And then just the last thing I want to talk about with the education is democracy. My former congressman, Abner Mikva, said democracy is a verb, right? And I think if viewed in those terms, the types of engagements we have had, the types of setbacks we have had, they're obviously disconcerting. And yet, I think the impact on the individuals that Sasha spoke about, the impact on small departments that we've heard about, seeing the people here who have carried on the legacy in their professional work in many ways, which Liliana spoke about, those are things that we could carry on. I think the best spirit, OSF began, as we heard, sending photocopies of things to Czechoslovakia. The spirit of impacting people, impacting places is really important. I teach a class through the Open Society University Network, which has students from 15 different countries talking about civic engagement. And whether you're a student from Myanmar, who's in Thailand right now, or a student from Afghanistan, who's in Central Asia, the coming together of people from different environments to learn with and from each other is an amazing experience. It's great as an educator, and it's great for students. And these are the legacies that, even though there's challenges, even though there's problems, even though there's been major losses, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who are impacted by CEP, and we can be proud of that, and we could carry on the work even in really, really difficult times. So thank you.
Thank you, John, for setting us off to. There is the optimism in what you're saying, and it's an important element to have as we move forward with this conversation. And I think democracy, as you say, it's vast. It looks differently in different places, but I think two key elements are voice and participation. And voice and participation inclusive and as expansive as possible. And I think education and the kind of education CEP brought into the classrooms played a role and continues to play a role. So with that, I'll turn to Oleksandr Semyonov, CEP, AFP Eastern Scholar, local fellow, Smolny College, Russia. Smolny, which was a very dear partner of Bard, but I have also been involved with Smolny, or had been for a very long time, from HESP's side and then working closely with John. So it was a sad moment that Smolny is no more, but John could later on talk about Smolny in exile. So over to Oleksandr.
Well, thank you so much for including me. So good to see some faces from the old time, some current colleagues from OSUN and the CEU. Actually, the memory about Smolny is I remember Jonathan Becker at one point saying, "A break is a human right." And I'm so glad he allowed and persisted in that belief at this conference, allowing us a 2-minute break. Not very long, but that's okay. Apart from the fond memories that we'll share, I also wanted to share 2 points of reflection in retrospect, because the program is no more, and the situation that we live in is very different indeed. I was indeed both the CEP and AFP fellow at 2 institutions, but most of my time with Smolny College or Smolny Institute. And I'm also referencing here a report that I co-authored with my colleague Ilya Gerasimov, which is a country report on Russia that we wrote for the World Humanities Report, commissioned by the International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences at the UNESCO. Whoever is interested, I can share that, because I do talk in that report about both Smolny and the CEP. My first point of reflection is that CEP and AFP represented an alternative model of realignment and rearrangement of academic community in the global setting. It is true that initially the project was conceived as part of the transition theory. It was envisaged as a structural type of relations between the metropole of Western knowledge and native academic communities. Well, this is the kind of colonial situation in the model of relationship. And it was evinced, for instance, by the formal criterion of selecting scholars with Western obtained degrees. The idea was also there in the seminars and the formats which presume the diffusion of methodologies of social sciences and humanities from the Western metropole to the native institutions. But what I want to say, and here I concur with multiple voices in this conference, that this initial structural model was challenged and overcome in the regional workshops, in the conferences, in the collective project initiatives that came from the community, from the network of fellows. I gave you one example among others, and that is the example of the project that was conceived in 2000, so we are at 25. It's called Journal of Ab Imperio, Studies of New Imperial History and Nationalism in the Post-Soviet Space. 3 out of 5 original founding editors were CEP-AFP participants, CEP-AFP scholars. And we benefited greatly from the debates within the CEP-AFP network about possible alternative visions of academic landscape beyond the structural binary of scientific metropole and native periphery. Inspired by this intellectual debates, we envisaged in our journal the production of knowledge as premised on hybridization of knowledge paradigms and academic positionality, thus explicitly overcoming the structural positionality of coloniality of Western knowledge and epistemicide of the native academic community. Apart from Ab Imperio, I can also refer to the example of the seminar critique of social sciences at Smolny that also aimed at hybridization of this seemingly irreconcilable structural poles. And I think this is particularly important as we reflect, as many of the voices sort of come about the imperial or the colonial paradigm, and because currently the position of the Russian government is that of nativism, that is rejecting Western science for its colonial oppression and reducing subjectivity and pluralism. And I think that alternative model was there in the CP, at least in my experience and experience of my colleagues. We were inspired by that. The second point of reflection is that I think CEP-AFP represented a different blueprint for change in academic community. several speakers at this conference has already stressed that it was a network. It was a community, but also a network. It supported individuals. So Sasha, I'm with you on that. But it also supported different terrains for them to form research teams, to form networks, and create sort of a horizontal platform for production of knowledge and engagement with education. Well, and this is the story I don't think I shared with many, around the same time, 2004, as Ab Imperia was supported, indeed, by the CEP AFP, the Open Society Institute in Russia was embarking on a mega project that is going big, going large, creating partnership with big institutions, and ultimately ending up, I think, in the institutional trap. So my memory of from 2004 is that on the one hand, we were supported by the CEP, by this horizontal network community. On the other hand, we were raided, or the attempt was made by the OSI Russia to raid us, to hijack the journal by none other than a member of the board, academician Chubarya. So I think it's now sort of seen how that institutional trap was combined gradually in Russia with the logic of neoliberal reform that reduced not just the autonomy of the institutions, but the autonomy of the faculty, the academic autonomy within the institutions of higher education. And I think the work at the CEP represented that different alternative, a different vision of how things could be organized. So I think that both alternative paradigms, in terms of production of knowledge and in terms of academic autonomy and faculty autonomy, are still relevant for the present day. And this is what should be highlighted in the past of the CEP AFP. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much. Really, you have brought out some very compelling ideas for the panel. And yes, the two pillars of academic freedom being individual freedom and institutional autonomy, both under stress. Once again, I'd underscore not just in countries which we are talking about today, but in general, everywhere. And the other thing, which I think many of us have sort of spoken indirectly, is an idea which informs CEP's efforts, and I think it's very important for today, is solidarity. And working in solidarity with peer institutions across the world, creating pathways for exchange of ideas, fostering spaces for plural perspectives. I think democracy without pluralism is no democracy. Electoral democracy on its own, dominated by a majority, is not the model of democracy one is looking for. So fostering space for plural ideas, which is what I think keeps a democracy vibrant. I think CEP did that without articulating in so many ways. And that's what I was struck by, 30 years later, that this is precisely what we were doing without making a fuss about. So with that, I'll turn to someone I'm having trouble pronouncing his name. And you need to help me, Aleś.
Aleś Łahviniec.
Aleś Łahviniec. Yeah, your name is
Okay.
more complicated than mine. Usually people
Really?
struggle with mine.
Oh,
So
Belarus.
I turn to you, and you were a local fellow, European Humanities University in Belarus, a university I knew well as
Yes.
a CEP regional director, and I used to visit quite a bit in Minsk.
Yeah.
So,
Well, many thanks for this event and the opportunity to speak. I will not repeat previous speakers. Thanks, Oleksandr, and thanks, Oleksandr, for different scopes. But first, the importance of personal development, investment in professors, and also the idea of structural change, which is also important. Well, from the perspective of a Belarusian, it was, one might see the whole story as a series or accumulation of losses or setbacks. But still, well, I combined in my activities both. I applied, by the way, twice, was accepted for the second time. And I really enjoyed being part of the network. It was really network, and I was happy to meet many Ukrainian, well, we were visiting mostly to Ukraine. And it was, Oleksandr, it was kind of regional identities that was created with UBM scholars. It was great. I was happy to bring students to participate in different conferences. And it was really about, I never thought about a methodology, and it was really revealing for me to learn a lot. And it was transformative for me as a teacher to learn about interactive methods about democracy in classroom, and I tried to practice that. And then I switched, well, to more activist part because the year 2004, the end of the project, but also the end, it was the end of my university in Belarus. And then I continued to, when each year immigrated, I continued to teach part-teach them there, but I will also, from 2004, I was not a politician because there is no real politics in Belarus. Even at that time, I was kind of dissident. I stood for several elections to parliament, but there is no election, and while the regime was hardening, and of course we could not even dream about any systemic change or change in education. So now, I try to be short. I look at the word. Now I'm an immigrant in Poland. I had to live in 2021 because of being previously engaged, and also as a political analyst. And there is a criminal case, as against many of my colleagues. And what makes me proud of my participation in CEP are those students who benefited directly or indirectly from the program, and many of them, by the way. And I was also happy to meet Vlad. Hello once again. Many excellent, tremendous Ukrainians, and also I got closer, and we became very close friends with Vitaly Selitsky, late Vitaly Selitsky, a very close friend of mine. And so I see my students who really developed and grew up to become much better scholars than I did. And but now, being here in Poland, I'm back a bit to academia. We try to create a free Belarus university, an online university for Belarusians. So I didn't lost my enthusiasm, but still, well, the situation, when we look in general about the changes and democracy in the region, is really not very promising.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aleś, for sharing this perspective. And I don't see Liliana Popescu on the screen. Liliana, are you there? I don't. So I'm going to turn to Sophia Howlett, who was a faculty fellow at Kyiv-Moyhla Academy, International, Solomon University, and National University of Kyiv, and was the country director of Ukraine and academic coordinator of Ukraine, before moving on to do very interesting things in the US. And she remains involved as a head of a very interesting institution, which is on a global scale. So Sophie, over to you to wrap up this conversation. And if there is remaining time and appetite, then we'll just open the floor for anyone to jump in.
Well, thank you very much, Nandini. Thanks for putting me at the end, because I feel basically that I've just spent the past hour learning things. So I'm going to very much just simply add from my own perspective here. and maybe a little bit from the perspective of now sitting in the United States and thinking about global international educational development, which is basically my day job these days. I was very struck, first of all, by some of the comments that we've heard during this past hour. Sasha was talking. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Aleś. So Sasha was talking about grassroots versus system change. I guess the way that I would think about this, and I've come to think about it since my CEP days, when the going is good in a country, then you have the opportunity to do real system change. But when the going is bad, that's when you have to focus on how are you supporting individuals who want to keep going, who want access, and in a way that gives them agency. So I guess I would think about it that way. It's not a kind of an either or, it's a both and it's understanding the point at which the country is at and the politics and what is possible within that country. And I think one of the wonderful things about CEP, AFP, is that it was able at different times in its history to provide both, depending on the country and the people that were involved. So I think what I'm saying here is that actually this was an enormously flexible model. And it was not only very flexible, it was also a model that changed in response to evolving issues. And it was also a model that, because it was about networks, especially as it developed, allowed essentially, it was about opening doors to different sister organizations, to different connections. So it was not just about networking amongst ourselves, but networking with all the different organizations to which CEP became affiliated, connected. And that made it very, very powerful in terms of giving agency at the right moments to the right institutions and professors and students. So I do want to speak at those different levels. So first of all, you know, in the bad days when it's just about individuals, what did it give us and our students and our connections? I mean, from a personal perspective, I think the individual impact, goodness knows, yes, at the beginning, it was extremely imperialistic. That wasn't deliberate. It was just that we were a bunch of 20 and 30-something-year-olds who were very enthusiastic. And good Lord, the naivete that we brought to the situation. And I can't believe that I went around in my late 20s telling people what they should be doing and how they should be organizing their universities and their departments. But leaving that to one side, and hopefully we all learned a lot in that process, we did have an extraordinary impact on individual students. And in many respects, I think we would all acknowledge that the biggest ongoing impact of CEP, AFP has been the impact on those individual students, the opportunities to get scholarships, to go on and do extraordinary things. Many of them then went on to become Eastern Scholars or came into AFP. We are still in contact with many of our former students here, and being able to follow their lives has been extraordinary for both me and my husband. And yes, I am a CEP marriage. And yes, we're still together. So there was this, and this will remain, I think, a huge inheritance legacy of CEP. Secondly, we were a bridge to the outer world, maybe unwittingly, for the professors and the institutions that we worked with. So we were able to say, oh, have you thought about this? Can I connect you to my homeschool, etc., etc. And it opened a door. And so in that way, we not only gave students agency to fulfill their dreams, to get on with their lives, to sort of see how they maybe would map out their future, but we also gave professors and institutions agency to be able to do some of the things they've been thinking about. For instance, how do I get books to do this? How do I build a new curriculum? I've heard all these new ideas, but how do I access them? And then thirdly, and also very importantly, there are many people on this call, well, all the people on this call, frankly, who were inspired by their engagement with CEP, AFP, whether through getting scholarships, whether through being fellows, whether as founders, board members, to go on to a life of engagement with international education generally. Even if maybe we're not doing that all of the time, each of us in our own way have been inspired to lives that engage in service and that engage with the international and that engage with trying to live up to some of the values that CEP inculcated in us. And I will say that from the perspective of somebody who had absolutely nothing to do with international higher education before I came to CEP. I was a happy lit professor in Britain. I was seeing this as just 1 year away. And now it's what, 30 years later, and that's still my day job. And so I think CEP, AFP opened up this doorway to us personally of how we could do things differently and how we could be differently and maybe make some impact. And sometimes that impact is also stepping out of the way for others to be able to make impact. And that's been one of the joys. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of that individual impact. And I would also add something to that, something that's been on my mind a lot. Yes, John, I remember being interviewed by you as well. You were lying on the grass at Oxford with your eyes closed, and I thought you were asleep. So one of my first memories of CEP, and I still went to Ukraine even after that, right? So when I think about some of the things that I'm dealing with today, one of the things I go and talk about to other schools is how we need to be connecting more with Africa, ironically. This is because post-COVID, many people have started re-engaging with Europe, with the Middle East, with Latin America, but we're seeing a real dearth of engagement with Africa. So it's something I've been going out and talking about. And one of the reasons I've been talking about it is because I can see that if we're not careful, the next generation of US citizens and of African citizens are simply not going to know each other. And I think we can say the same thing about CEP and how that connected us, whether we were living in India, the United States, in Great Britain, in Europe, and the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. CEP connected us and made sure that when things got tough in these different countries, that we knew each other, we understood what was going on in those countries. We could phone up and say how we could be of help. We could also advocate for what was going on in those different countries. We could talk to our students, whether we're at BARD or SIT, about those countries from experience, about those people, and truly connect people. And that is extremely powerful, that relationship between individuals across the world. And it's something that we really think about. We should think about how we maintain into our future. So institutionally, let's just think about a few very brief things. I must admit that I was always somebody who felt a little iffy about this whole democratization thing. Democratization is a big word to me, and I'm not sure that I'm going to go in and democratize anything. But I was struck by something that's come up this morning, and that is, it seems to me there is a dichotomy between democratization and system change, or development in terms of what funders will fund. And it takes me back to a conversation that I had in, I think it was the early 2000s, at a foundation I will not name in the US. We've flown out from Budapest to have a conversation with that funder who was considering stopping funding to Russia. And we had a big argument. And unlike John walking in and getting all that money from George Soros, I lost that argument to my immense chagrin. There was somebody else in the room who said, look, Russia's got a ton of money and doesn't need our money to continue the work in higher education in Russia. And I argued that it was still a place where autonomy was very frail, where the political situation was very frail, and we needed, if we wanted to keep supporting the change that we were engaging with, we needed to keep putting that money in. But that is sometimes the difference between development and democratization broadly painted, that people think that development is somehow one and done and is about how much cash people have, rather than an attitude of what are we really here for? How are we working with individuals? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And seeing ourselves in there for the long haul. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot too, as we moved up to today. Because I still feel that it was an immense lost opportunity to see our work and our activities in the former Soviet Union in particular, but also in places like Hungary as somehow a tick box and it's one and done, and now we move on. I'm also struck about how things have gone really full circle, or how they've moved now to the type of discourse that we were having in the 1990s and 2000s. So now when one talks to USAID or to the State Department about new proposals coming out, so often you hear, we want to focus on localization. We want to focus on local agency. We want to focus, we don't want to bring in, we used to call it in my CEP days, Lufthansa aid. Many of you remember, you know, the way we used to have people flying in and out and doing projects and not really engaging at the grassroots. And of course, the other conversation that we're having a lot here in the United States is around decolonization. And again, this is something that I felt that CEP handled so brilliantly throughout its history, as it moved away from being just folks like me to being something that was really trying to build that local grassroots network and trying to hand agency over to AFP fellows, Eastern scholars. So it really makes me think that a lot of the stuff that we were talking about in the 1990s and 2000s, maybe we were a little ahead of our time in that respect. And I can't help but say it, so why don't I just say it? I've been increasingly thinking this week about, as we thought about getting together, about how this ended too early. And maybe this is part of my thinking as I think about the good we did, the institutional impact, that competition between development per se and real engagement in a structure. That many of the things that we were talking about are the things that are coming back now, that are flavor of the week, that we really did think about and struggle with and engage with and have blueprints for. And this also goes for my own institution. You know, when I consider the way in which we thought about network institutions, many of you on this call will remember this, the way we thought about CEU at the beginning as a network university, the way we tried to think about how we could be a true engaged group of individuals, academics from all over the world working together. These are things that I now want to see at my own institution. I feel that CEP, AFP went a long, long way in that regard, and there's still further joy and productivity in that model. And it's something that I'm trying to do myself here at SIT, So it continues to inspire me from that perspective. At the worst, I think when things were hard, we gave access to information, experience, and support for our individual students and to professors to have the agency to achieve their own dreams through grants and scholarships. At the best, I did see the growth from individual catalysts with particular people all the way through then to combining to becoming groups of professors that then got together and developed new degrees, that then form new departments, with CEP and AFP then being able to come back in and contribute by providing support to professors, and eventually to some of those individuals going on and becoming reforming rectors and being able to change their institutions. And at that point, CEP was also there to be able to provide new professors for those reforming institutions. So when the structure was open, we were there and ready and were able to make huge differences at particular locations. And then when life was difficult, we made a major impact on individuals. And I think we need to be able to take that with us. Were we ahead of our time? Yeah, maybe we were. But it also inspires me to consider how could we now take some of those models and ideas and now push them further into the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you. Thank you for that grand finale. Really, as I wrote to you on the chat, is what we are looking for. There is a nice quote John has shared. John, maybe you would want to read it. People are leaving, so the quote has, yeah. John says, Jacques Rancière, a French political philosopher, said, democracy is not a destination, it's a way to travel. Also, both development and democracy, nothing is a linear process. And that has been understood through democracy building and development endeavors of the last 60, 70 years. There is also, since we are talking a lot about institutions and democratic institutions and institutional change, there is a definition of institution, which is institutions are humanly devised constraints to structure economic, political, and social interactions. These are devised by humans, and thus, who are the people who devise these constraints and how they are educated, how participatory the institution building process is. And I think education is central to answering some of these bigger ideas. And Sophie, CEP was ahead of its time. Don't know if it was. We were grateful that it influenced our lives and our personal and professional lives. And I just wanted to share one little thing, since Donna is with us and people have talked about various anecdotes. Donna brought CEP administration to adulthood because pre-Donna, John had left the office to move on to CEU, and Daniel and Phil were the people in the office. And when I arrived, it was not an adult office. And Donna came and she told us, we'll open at this time. The printer should be always full of paper. The fax machine, the paper should be on. All the administrative know-how and efficiency to the organizational side was, Donna brought us to maturity in that sense. And we learned a great from her as young administrators. So thank you, Donna, for that. And we are 16 minutes over the hour. For me, it's 5:16. People are welcome to stay and share their reflections on this panel in general, but I don't want to hold people now formally. So with that, I thank you to all the panelists for their insightful reflections. It's really been a pleasure and joy to be part of the Civic Education Project for 30 years and more. And the project may not be around, but I think we are around, and that means CEP is around us. And it is a replicable model. It is flexible, as Donna mentioned, and I think it was a solidarity-based idea, and I think solidarity is an important sentiment in the current global context. So with that, I take my leave as a formal moderator of this panel, and thank you all.
So I want to thank Nandini. I just want to say and thank everyone from that last panel. Really super interesting. I realize for many of us we're partway through on hour 4 and it's different times in different places. Happy to open up the floor to anything and other people who haven't spoke. I see some people here who haven't spoke, or maybe people are desperate to get out or whatever, but why don't we just open things up? And if anyone wants to say anything, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Here we go. I can.
Okay, I'm Eric Gilder. I was with the 1992, 1994. I was with the CEP in Romania. So I think the first year where they put people in Romania in the first expansion. I had just finished my doctorate at Ohio State University, got on a plane in September of '92 and flew into Bucharest. And of course, interestingly, I was assigned to a private university, which was a new institution, and really over those 2 years, really tried to help that university function. And of course, we went to took students to debate programs and sponsored other things. I would say, taking off from the last speaker, I think I had an effect both on the individual students, but also institutionally. It changed my life in a way, because if someone had come to me in 1990 and said, I'd be sitting where I'm sitting now, I'm talking from Papua New Guinea, where I'm currently a professor here. But my whole academic career post PhD has been abroad. So, and I'm still in Romania somewhat, because I'm a habilitated doctoral professor in Sibiu in Lucea University. So it had a big effect on my time. And I was there at the time. That period in Romania up until 1997 was very important, because that was the year that Romania joined the EU. Right before that time, in that period I was there, 1992 onward, there was a decision to be made which way Romania was going to tilt. And then during the Constantinescu government from 1996 onward, the decision was made to join EU and NATO. And that changed Romania's trajectory. And I remember, and I think I had trained a lot of students or individually, but then who ended up also making transitional changes. I remember a lot of my colleagues, Romanian colleagues at that time, they ended up doing master's and PhD programs first at Central European University and then on to America. So that provided an access door to many people who are now in leadership positions. So I feel very good that I took a small part in that. And I think it was a very effective organization at the time. And of course, those were in the early years, and it was somewhat chaotic and crazy, but I think it came out well.
Thank you, Eric. That's great. Does anyone else want to add anything? Because there's a few people who haven't had the chance or comment on what's been said or anything else. I know we're getting to marathon time, but anything else? I was joking before we began that one of my post-CEP experiences was getting a letter from a lawyer informing them that I was the founder of CEP Romania, something I entirely forgot about, and that they were planning on closing it, which I was glad to know that it was that, rather than being part of a investigation into money laundering or something like that. So it was good to find out that that wasn't the case. Any other thoughts or comments at this point in time? I think people are more, and it's great to see Steve and Anne in particular. And
one thing I could add, another institutional thing that was great was that we started, when second year I was in Romania, we started a reading circle with graduate students, and we were just Xeroxing graduate level readings of Foucault and Zizek and Rigore and so forth. And it started small with the little Bucharest reading group, and then the second year it had a national reading group, and we ended up inviting in 1995 Zizek, Sandra Zizek, and Anthony Giddens to Bucharest, and they did a stage presence together, and they had at that point had not met each other personally yet. So I remember that as a great fun and achievement.
Great. That's great. I am going to put it out to everyone else before there's just like me sitting here and Nandini. Steve or Anne, you have anything left? Kate, you want to add anything? You're all good. All right.
Thanks for,
Please.
Jonathan, just thanks for doing this. This was just terrific.
Indeed. Thanks.
I should
So
say,
meaningful.
say one little thing. I have a lot of information on people. The great thing is I have students from Smolny in exile who I have to hire this summer. So I'm going to have them try to put the information we've gotten in an organizable form and find people through some research and see what we come out with. I realized this was organized sort of at short notice, but it was just like either do it or don't and get the ball rolling. And it's been really valuable. So you're most welcome.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Good to see you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
congratulations to all. Bye.
Best wishes to all.
Great to see everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.